Chapter 25. Maggie had to fight back the urge to get in her car and chase down the van as it disappeared down the road. Every fiber of her being was screaming at her to stop it, pull the occupants out, and put a bullet in each of their heads. Doing so would probably cost Jenni her life, however. She choked down the rage and turned her attention to Michael. He had wrapped part of his shirt around his severed finger. The blood was turning the cloth dark. He was extremely pale, and his face was screwed up in agony. She started to look around for the part of the finger that had been bitten off by the monstrosity Liber, or Leo, or whatever had brought with him. There was a chance that it could be reattached and saved, but she would have to find it quickly and get him immediately to the town doctor. "You won't find it," Michael said in a strained voice. "The piece of finger. It's gone." "It might still be here," Maggie replied. "They didn't take it with them." He shook his head weakly. "It's gone. Bango ate it." "He did what?" "It's what he does. He's a cannibal. It doesn't matter. I have to get this washed out." Maggie followed closely as he slowly walked up the porch steps into the front door. His movements were oddly stilted, and he was breathing heavily. Both were signs that he was starting to go into shock. She hurried up the steps and grabbed his arm to steady him. "Keys," he muttered. It took her a moment to realize what he was asking. He couldn't get his keys out of his pocket without letting go of the shirt wrapped around the bleeding finger, and the woman had locked the door behind her. She carefully reached into his front right pocket and retrieved them before unlocking the door. "You just wanted my hand in your pants," she said, hoping that the humor would help keep him calm. "Can you blame me?" he asked as they went inside. "Nope, I'm very good with my hands." The bookcase concealing the hidden study was standing wide open. Maggie quickly crossed over to it and looked inside. Poe was gone. She closed the bookcase and returned to Michael's side. She helped him to the downstairs bathroom. As he slowly removed his hand from his shirt, she turned on the water in the sink and made sure that it was warm enough to clean the wound, but not so hot that it would burn. He took a deep breath and put the damaged finger under the tap. He immediately closed his eyes and swore loudly. The veins on his neck stood out as he forced himself to keep his finger in the water despite the obvious pain. Maggie awkwardly stood next to him, unsure what she could do to help. His body visibly relaxed as he adjusted to the feeling. Sweat was running off of his forehead, and he still looked pale, but at least it didn't seem like he was going to pass out anymore. He carefully continued to rinse out the wound. "In the upstairs bathroom there's a bottle of liquid bandage," he said. "I think there's some wrapping too, but I can't remember for sure. Would you get them for me?" "Liquid bandage," she repeated. "Michael, I don't think that's a good idea. We need to get you to a doctor." "It's a terrible idea. It's probably going to do some permanent damage to my finger if I use it instead of getting surgery, or at least stitches. It doesn't matter. We have to figure out how to get Jenni away from those people." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm volunteering. Come on, go get the things so I can stop the bleeding." Maggie reluctantly left the bathroom and headed upstairs. She nearly tripped over Mira. It had positioned itself right next to the base of the stairs, its dark eyes focused on the door of the bathroom as it whimpered quietly in a worried tone. It took a bit of searching, but she finally found the tube of liquid bandage in the medicine cabinet in the upstairs bathroom. There wasn't any wrapping, but there was a roll of medical tape, so she grabbed that instead. She also took a bottle of aspirin. She hurried back down to the main floor. Michael nodded his thanks when she returned to the bathroom. He took his finger out from under the water and unscrewed the cap of the tube. Taking a series of deep breaths, he squeezed liquid bandage into the wound. Fuck, 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 he exclaimed. "Holy shit, that hurts." "Is there anything else that I can do?" Maggie asked. "I'm going to need you to wrap up the wound." He set down the tube and lightly blew on the liquid bandage. Not too tight. Cutting off circulation would be really bad. He held out his hand for her. A wave of sympathy filled her as she examined the damaged finger. It would be something that he would live with for the rest of his life. She carefully bandaged it while making sure to leave it as loose as possible. After she had finished, he opened the aspirin bottle and fished out 2 pills. He held them up to his mouth for a moment before he shook his head. He put the pills back into the bottle and sealed it. "I can't take them," he said, setting the bottle down on the edge of the sink. "Aspirin stops clotting. Can't believe I almost forgot that. Stupid." "Hey, don't be so hard on yourself," Maggie said. "I forgot that too, and besides, you just suffered a traumatic injury." "Doesn't matter. I need to do better. Bingo will kill everyone if I'm not at my best." "He's that dangerous?" Michael closed his eyes and nodded. "Bingo is a plague. He's only interested in causing pain. He and his troop, when they were at their peak, they killed and killed and killed. And that was before whatever deal they struck with whatever dark power that made them the way that they are now." She stared at him intently. "I don't understand." He took a deep breath. For decades, all the way back to the 60s, Bingo Circus Extravaganza has appeared on televisions in small towns. On the surface, it's just some children's variety show with puppets and clowns and silly antics. In reality, it's a warning. No, not a warning. It's a threat. A threat that Bingo and Bango and Poe and Leo Lion and all the others have come to your town, and they won't be leaving until they've had their fill of bloodshed. "You're not making much sense." Michael opened his eyes and looked at her. "Bingo doesn't make much sense. That's the problem. He's completely chaotic and unpredictable. It's why I wasn't—" He stopped talking and looked down into the sink. Maggie remained silent. There was something about the look on his face that told her that he was working through something that she shouldn't interrupt. "It's why I wasn't there to save Evelyn," Michael said, his voice quieter than it had been. "I thought that I had figured out what he was planning. I thought I knew exactly where he was going to be, exactly how to counter his play. That I was the one person over all these years that understood what Bingo Circus Extravaganza was, and that I could put a stop to it. I was wrong." "Michael," Maggie began. "We have to find a way to not just stop him, but to end him. If we don't, he's going to come after you, he's going to come after Sarah, he's going to come after anyone even remotely tied to any of us. Then he's going to pick up and move on to the next place, and it's all going to happen again. This has to end here." Chapter 26. Jenni sat down in the sand and pulled her legs up under her chin. She watched as the ocean waves swelled and receded over and over again as they rolled into shore. Despite her overall fear, she had to admit that it was a hell of a view. A few hours earlier, she'd awoken in a bedroom that she didn't recognize, in a bed that wasn't hers. She had immediately gotten up and left the room, and she had found that she was in a beach house. It had been immensely confusing. The last thing she remembered before waking up was the woman in the carnival tent reaching out and grabbing her arm. Everything after that was a blur. She had searched the house top to bottom and found nothing to explain what had happened to her. She had then ventured outside to see if there was some sort of clue there. After a few minutes, she had found that she was at the edge of a vast desert with no sign of life as far as she could see. Now, she sat in the sand and tried to come to grips with what was happening. She had no idea where she was or how she had gotten there, but in a way, that didn't matter. What mattered in the immediate moment was making sure that she could survive wherever she had ended up. She looked up and down the beach. At least it didn't appear that she was in any immediate danger. There wasn't anyone else around for miles. She wondered what Maggie was doing. Her wife would have returned to the carnival quite a while ago, and she must be worried sick. Jenni smiled slightly. If she knew Maggie, she was tearing the carnival apart piece by piece at this very moment. The smile faded. The woman with the ice show, Lisbeth Erickson, had known that she and Maggie were married. She hoped that Maggie wasn't in danger. Well, there was no sense worrying about it. Jenni stood up and brushed the sand off of her. Maggie was the most stubborn woman that she knew. She could take care of herself. Jenni started to make a mental checklist. The 3 things that she needed more than anything else were shelter, water, and food. The shelter was already covered thanks to the beach house. That left the other 2 items on the list. She took a deep breath, drawing in the scent of the beach. The water was definitely salt water. The air smelled strongly of it. Even if it hadn't been, she still wouldn't have wanted to drink from it without boiling it first, and there was no power in the house. There wasn't much in the way of twigs or other wood for a fire either. The few sparse trees didn't have many limbs. Jenni went back into the house through the kitchen door. She had been so preoccupied with trying to figure out where she was that she hadn't thought to check the structure for basic necessities. She turned the handle on the sink and was surprised to see water come out of the curved tap. Using the tips of her fingers, she tasted it. To both her surprise and her relief, it was clean and drinkable. Not knowing if the sink would continue to work, she put the stopper in the drain and filled it with water. She turned it off and nodded to herself. That took care of drinking water, at least temporarily. That just left finding food. She didn't bother to check the refrigerator. Without any power, there wouldn't be anything able to be eaten even if there was food inside. There was a small pantry, but when she opened it, she found that it was empty. None of the cupboards or shelves contained anything edible either. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her elbows on it as she thought things through. Something under her right elbow poked her skin, and she raised it to figure out what she had touched. Dried to the top of the table was what appeared to be old blood. It must have become stuck to the table years earlier. She stood back up and wiped at her elbow. None of the substance seemed to have stuck. She slowly walked through the house. There wasn't much to it, just the kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom with a bathroom attached to it. She wandered from room to room, looking for anything that might prove to be useful. She didn't find much. There was an oil lantern that looked like it hadn't been used for a very long time, along with a few canisters of fuel for it. She also found a half-used box of matches. Between those items, she would be able to move around when it became dark, at least until she ran out of oil. Placing the items on the kitchen table, she went back outside and examined the house itself closely. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. It was just an old run-down beach house that was badly in need of repairs and a fresh coat of paint. When she returned to the side of the house with the door, she found a woman standing on the steps. It was Sylvia Curioso, the carnival worker that she had met when she and Maggie had tried to purchase their tickets. At the time, she had seemed like a pleasant enough person, but now her eyes were cold, and she looked at her with a blank expression. "Hello, Miss Grant," she said in a voice devoid of emotion. "Miss Curioso?" Jenni asked, confused. "What's going on? Where am I?" "You're in the Sea Lodge. As for the rest of the questions that you may or may not have, I do not have time for them. I am simply here to give you the facts of the situation. You are to be our guest for the time being." "Why? I don't understand." "You don't need to understand." She pointed through the doorway. "Inside you will find a year's worth of food and supplies. This will be restocked as needed. You are not to leave the house at night or during times when the sky is dark. This is for your own safety. If you do leave during those times, you will most likely die." Jenni's mind raced as it tried to keep up. A year's worth of supplies? How long was Curioso planning on keeping her here? Why was she doing this? "There is no escape from here," Curioso continued. "The desert that surrounds this place is endless. The sea is wider and deeper than the human mind can comprehend. Any attempt to leave will inevitably be met with death. Do I make myself clear? Without waiting for an answer, she turned and went into the house. Jenni hesitated for just a moment before running after her. She might be able to force Curioso to take her back to Lamplight Woods if she could catch her. Curioso was gone when she reached the kitchen. She quickly checked every part of the house, but she had vanished. She punched the wall in frustration. There was, however, a large pile of boxes and containers in the living room that hadn't been there before. Rubbing her throbbing hand, she started going through them. The majority of them contained canned and packed foods, the kinds that would last for long periods of time without going bad. She moved those boxes off to one side so that she could sort them later. There were also a variety of things that would allow her to survive. One box contained a camping stove with bottles of propane, as well as a plate, a bowl, and a set of silverware. Another box had clothes and cleaning supplies. The final container, the largest of them all, had an odd mixture of blankets and fishing equipment. Curioso was clearly planning on keeping her here for a long time. She looked around the room slowly, trying to come to grips with the fact that she was trapped and would have to survive on her own. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore filled the room as she sank down to the floor and wept. Chapter 27. Sarah and Josh were retrieving their bikes from the split-log storage room when her phone rang. She dug around in her pocket for a moment before retrieving it. She frowned as she saw who was calling. "Hey, Dad," she said as she answered it. "Is everything okay?" "Not by a long shot," her father replied. "Are you still at the carnival?" "No, we just left. What's wrong?" "I don't have time to go into everything. The short version is that Bingo is free and on his way to the carnival. The people working there actually work for him." Sarah felt a cold chill run through her. Bingo was the creature that had killed her mother. She had encountered him once before when she had first discovered the underground bunker beneath their backyard, and even though he had been contained inside of a cell, the experience had left her shaken for quite a while afterward. "Fuck," she said in a choked voice. "Fuck indeed," her father said. "I need you to not go back to the carnival. Don't trust anyone from there either, especially a woman named Sylvia Curioso. She's actually Poe, one of Bingo's most dangerous followers." "Yeah, okay, not a problem." "You can't come back to the house either. I can do a few things to make sure that it's safe, but they also have Jenni. Maggie and I need to find her and to try to figure out some way to stop all of this. Do you have somewhere that you can go? Not Josh's house either. We have to assume that they know about him." Sarah thought for a moment. "Yeah, I know a place. It's—" "Don't tell me," her father snapped. "Sorry, I didn't mean to bite your head off there. Just don't tell me where you're going. If I don't know, there's no way that they can find out from me." "That sounds ominous." "Yeah, it does. We don't know what these people are capable of, so until we do, we have to assume the worst. I'll call you when we figure out what we're doing. Stay safe, kiddo." "You too, old man." Sarah put the phone back into her pocket and looked at Josh. He was staring at her with a worried look on his face. She shook her head. "I'll tell you when we get where we need to go," she said. They waved goodbye to Mr. Grant and headed down the street. The cool night air whipped through Sarah's red hair. She didn't even remember when she had lost the tie that she had used earlier in the evening to keep it out of her face. Without it, she had to swipe the hair out of her eyes every so often. She led the way out of town and down a series of roads. When they reached what appeared to be a dead end, she angled her bike around the metal railing and into the woods behind it. There was a narrow path that was almost impossible to see unless someone was actively looking for it. They followed it deep into the woods, the glow from their bike lights barely enough to cut through the darkness. The path came to an abrupt halt at a large rock. Sarah got off of her bike and walked around to the other side of the boulder. Finding the odd series of grooves that she was looking for, she placed her hand on them and used her fingertips to release the lock. There was a hissing of escaping air, and a hidden hatch in the ground popped open. She gripped it with both hands and pulled up to open it all the way. Inside was a ladder leading down underground. "I'll go first," Josh offered. He carefully lowered himself into the hole and hurried down the ladder. It was roughly 10 feet to the bottom. "Okay, I'm ready," he called up. Sarah went back around the rock and picked up her bike. Making sure that she had a solid grip, she slowly lowered it down through the hatch. It hung in midair for a few seconds before she felt Josh start to pull it from below. She let go, and he carefully set it down on the concrete floor. They did the same thing for his bike. Once that was done, she went down the ladder and closed the hatch behind her. As the lock clicked into place, a series of dim bulbs came to life. They were small lights that had been set into the walls themselves. The bulbs were bright enough for them to see while they walked down the tunnel, but just barely. They came to a familiar metal door with a wheel lock. Josh turned the wheel and opened it, and they went inside. She flipped the light switch as they entered. There was a quiet humming noise as the overhead fluorescent bulbs turned on. She had brought them to the second of the hidden safe houses that they had discovered over the summer. It was very similar to the one behind the waterfall, featuring a collection of books and display cases, as well as an old computer. Unlike the waterfall safe house, however, this room also contained food and water that they had brought down when they had first found it. There was also a beat-up wood futon that they had purchased for almost nothing at a garage sale, so that they both had a place to sit. "Ready to tell me what's going on?" Josh asked as he shut and locked the door. Sarah quickly filled him in on what her father had told her. He listened intently, and she could see that something was bothering him besides the bad news that she was relaying to him. When she had finished, he nodded once. "I knew there was something going on with that carnival," he said, although she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. "Josh, is something going on that you're not telling me?" Sarah asked. "Ever since we had that argument, you've acted like there's something bothering you." He stared silently for a few moments as if he was trying to work out what to say. Seemingly coming to a decision, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. He unfolded it and handed it to her. "Trapped in the house," it read. "Need help. Josh Taylor." "I don't understand," she admitted. "What am I looking at here?" "I don't know," Josh replied. "That's my handwriting, and it looks like it was written in blood. I don't remember writing it, though, and based on the color and fading, it looks like it was written quite a while ago." "Where did you find it?" "On the ground outside of the building you found me in front of. I think something happened to me back there. I don't know what. The answer is so close, like it's right on the edge of my consciousness, but I just can't get it." He seemed disturbed by what he was saying. Sarah suddenly realized just how hard of a night he had been having. First, the memory of his parents' deaths had been dragged up by the woman with the wax. Then he had suffered a migraine, and now there was the prospect that something even worse had happened that he couldn't quite remember. "We'll figure things out together, Josh," she promised. Chapter 28. Before they could start to work on finding and freeing Jenni, Michael needed to make sure that only Bingo had escaped when Bango had broken into the underground bunker. There were 2 other paranormal creatures being held in cells, each one of them as dangerous as Bingo in their own way. He quickly went down into the bunker and verified that the other 2 cells were still sealed. While Bango hadn't freed the other 2 creatures, he had certainly done a number on Bingo's cell. The thick iron door had been ripped completely off of its hinges and was lying against the opposite wall. Michael tried to figure out just how much force that would have required before giving up. There was no way a normal human could have come anywhere close to doing that kind of damage. He examined the door for a moment. There were large dents in the sides where Bango had dug his fingers into it. The man, if he was a man at this point, had strength like he had never seen. He left the bunker and closed the hatch as best as he could. Bango hadn't opened it so much as he had ripped it apart. There was a large gap between the bent metal and the ground, but there wasn't much that he could do about it currently. Maggie was waiting for him when he returned to the back porch. She was anxiously tapping her foot with an annoyed scowl on her face. She quickly came down the porch steps as he approached. "Are you finally ready to go?" she asked. "I will be in a minute," he replied. "I'm guessing that you want us to go straight to the carnival?" "You heard Bingo. He practically invited us. They have to be keeping Jenni there somewhere." "Probably." He paused. "You do realize that this is a trap, right? It's exactly what they want." "Yeah, I'm fucking aware," she growled. "What the hell? You were all fired up about having to get there and kill Bingo. Now you're dragging your feet." He held up both hands, wincing as his damaged finger throbbed. "Hey, I'm on your side here, Maggie. I swear that I am. I'm using everything that I've got to keep myself under control. I can't see straight when it comes to Bingo, and if I go after him at anything but my best, he's going to have no trouble taking me apart piece by piece. That's why you have to take the lead on this. Jenni is your wife, so this is your call. I'll back whatever play you want to run." Maggie stared at him for a long moment, her jaw set in anger in her eyes. As he watched, the anger faded and was replaced by uncertainty. "I know you will," she said in a much different tone of voice. "Look, I'm sorry, Michael. I get it," he assured her. "I'm so sorry this is happening to you and your family. Let's figure out how to make this right." They went into the store. Michael opened the bookcase and they went into the hidden study. Mira was already inside. It stood next to the desk and watched him as he approached. "Believe me, I know," he muttered to the animal. "I'm not any happier about it than you are." "What was that?" Maggie asked as she closed the bookcase behind them. "Mira's upset about Bingo being free," he explained. "It had a special relationship with Evelyn when we were growing up." "Ah." She sat down in one of the chairs and ran a hand through her hair as he did the same. "Okay, so what are we going to do?" Michael hesitated. He didn't have a good answer for her. Bingo was completely unpredictable. There just wasn't much to use to come up with a plan with. He shook his head helplessly. They sat silently for a while. Michael eventually stood up and started to pace around the room. He always thought better when he was moving for some reason. Nothing was coming to him, though. It was like he had a mental block when it came to Bingo. He grimaced. His hands were trembling. It wasn't just that he wasn't thinking straight. He was scared. Scared that Bingo would take away Sarah the way he had Evelyn. Scared that he wouldn't be able to stop this horrible event that he knew was coming. Michael took a few deep breaths in an attempt to calm his nerves. They didn't help. "We need to walk in there like we own the place," Maggie said suddenly. Michael stopped pacing and looked at her in surprise. He'd gotten so far into his own thoughts that he had almost forgotten that she was there. It took him a moment to process what she had said. "We do?" he asked. "Yeah, we do," she confirmed. "We have to assume that anyone working for that carnival is a threat, right?" "Right." "That means that we're vastly outnumbered. 2 against God knows how many. We also know that they're expecting us, thanks to that puppet asshole's comments as they were leaving. The only advantage we have is if they think we've got something up our sleeves." "I think I get where you're coming from," he said slowly. "You're saying that if we go in there like we're completely comfortable doing so, They'll think that we know something that they don't. You want to throw them off with a complete bluff. Exactly. He nodded. Okay, yeah, I like it. It's a small advantage at best, but we can use any edge we can get. Do you have anything here that we can use? Maggie. She looked him in the eye. Michael, I know that the objects and artifacts that you and your family have collected over the years are kept here because they're dangerous and shouldn't be used. Look at the situation we're in, though. What other choice is there? Do you really think that a couple of guns are going to be enough? He looked away. He knew that she was right, but the thought of going against everything that his grandfather had taught him about enchanted, cursed, and otherwise special objects made him feel sick to his stomach. This wasn't Lamplight Woods' sheriff asking him for a favor, though. This was his best friend begging for help in her hour of need. And besides, she was right. There might be a few things that we can use, he conceded. Most of the most powerful objects can't be used without intense training or paying some awful price, but I think we'll be okay using some of the less powerful ones. Not us, Maggie corrected him. You. You know way more about this stuff than I do. I'd just be putting us in even more danger. You're putting a lot of faith in me. Michael, I always do. He had never been good at taking compliments, and he found himself unsure how to answer this one. Instead, he walked over to a display case sitting up against the wall opposite the door. He reached into his pocket to retrieve the case key. He swore as his bandaged finger hit the side of his pocket, causing fresh pain to radiate from it. He gritted his teeth and pulled out the key. There's one thing that you need to be the one to use, he said as he unlocked the case. Maggie got out of her chair and came over to stand beside him. He took a wooden box out of the case and handed it to her. The case was adorned with silver markings and a latch made from pure silver. She looked at him questioningly. He nodded at her once, and she opened it. Inside was an old revolver. That is an 1874 Colt single-action army, Michael explained. You probably know it better as a peacemaker. Chambered for a .45 Colt cartridge. Ivory handle. This particular peacemaker was owned by one Wild Bill Hickok. The Wild Bill Hickok? Maggie asked in surprise. This is a cool piece of history, but I don't get why you're showing me this. Wild Bill is famous for his accurate shooting. The legends say that he never missed a shot. Here's the part that most people don't know, however. At some point in his illustrious career, he encountered something unnatural. Something that simple bullets couldn't hurt, couldn't even touch. What was it? No one knows. What is known is that he sought out a shaman to help solve the problem. The shaman put a powerful blessing on the gun. Any bullet fired from it would pierce through anything, natural or unnatural. She tilted her head slightly. Now that sounds extremely useful. I'm sure the enchantment has its limits, but if it does, no one has found them yet. Go on, take it. Maggie reached into the box and carefully lifted the peacemaker off the red cushion. He watched as she examined it closely, working the weapon in her hands as she inspected it. When she was finished, she looked back up at him. Thank you, Michael, she said sincerely. I promise that I'll take care of it. I know you will, he said with a small smile. There's a box of silver rounds under the cushion. Between the peacemaker and those, you should be able to do a lot of damage. What are you going to use? He scratched the back of his neck as he looked around the study. Oh, I've got a few ideas. Chapter 29. That doesn't make any sense, Sarah said for a second time, staring at the computer screen from over Josh's shoulder. No, it doesn't, but you can see it for yourself, he replied, pointing at the screen. There aren't any camera feeds showing the field the carnival is in. She shook her head and stood up straight. When they had discovered the feeds from the legion of cameras that her grandfather had set up around Lamplight Woods, there had been at least a dozen that had shown the general area where the carnival had been set up. She distinctly remembered seeing at least 2 feeds that looked directly at the center of the field. To get that angle, they had to have been mounted to buildings in the downtown area. Now, though, there wasn't a single camera showing anything near the place. It would have been next to impossible for someone to find, remove, or disable every single one of them, and yet that appeared to be exactly what happened. It simply didn't make any sense. What's the closest camera that we've got? She asked as she reined in her annoyance. I'm pretty sure that's the one pointing towards the mayor's office, Josh answered as he cycled through the camera feeds again. Yeah, that's definitely it. Sarah sighed. While the mayor's office wasn't very far from the field, the camera he was referring to was pointing in the wrong direction to be able to see anything. It wasn't going to be any help. I'm so fucking tired, she said as she flopped down onto the futon. What time is it, anyway? It's after midnight, Josh replied as he continued to type on the ancient keyboard. Why don't you try to get some sleep? Maybe in a bit. How are you going to explain to your grandmother why you're not coming home tonight? He shrugged. I don't have to. Since she knew I was going to be with you at the carnival tonight, she took the opportunity to visit her sister in Pittsburgh. This is weird. She looked over at him. What's weird? I think it's a carnival tent? I thought you said that the cameras couldn't see into the carnival. They can't. I'm looking at one of the downtown feeds. Confused, Sarah stood back up and went over to see what he was talking about. The camera he was watching was positioned so that it was pointing at Grayson's general store. Immediately to the left of the store was a small alley that was mostly used for trucks making deliveries to both Grayson's and the pharmacy on the opposite side. Now, though, there was a tent set up in between the two businesses. It was large enough that it blocked the entire entrance to the alley. It was definitely the same kind of tent as the ones at the carnival. The hell? She muttered. Hold on, Josh said. Let me check something. He pressed a key on the keyboard and the image changed. They're now looking at Dylan's law firm, a small law practice consisting of one lawyer and one assistant that handled mostly estate planning. It was at the end of town furthest from the carnival, the very last building that could be considered part of downtown Lamplight Woods. To its right, in the open grassy area leading away from downtown, was another carnival tent. Although it was hard to be certain due to the cameras being black and white, this one looked darker than the one next to Grayson's. She remembered that when they had left Maestru and Liber's, the tents had become 2 colors, red and black. Josh cycled through all the cameras slowly as they closely watched the feeds. They spotted a number of other tents, all of them between or at the end of buildings. Sarah glanced at him and knew exactly what he was thinking. None of these had been there when they had retrieved their bikes. It's like they're, I don't know, filling in the gaps, he said as he lifted his glasses and rubbed the sides of his nose. Wherever there's a space that's more than a few feet wide, there's one of those tents. You know what I'm going to point out, right? Sarah asked. That there's no sign of anyone that's actually putting them up? Right. There wouldn't have been time to get this many tents up since we left without a small army, and we haven't seen a single person on any of these feeds. She was expecting a response, but Josh was silent. He had stopped cycling through the cameras and was simply staring at the screen. From the expression on his face, she could tell that he wasn't really looking at the image. I'm going to suggest something that I know sounds insane, he said finally. Everything in Lamplight Woods is insane, Sarah pointed out. What are you thinking? What if what if the carnival is somehow spreading? What? Like it's getting bigger? Yeah. Well, kind of. I'm not sure how to put this into words. What if the carnival is like a virus, a sickness that spreads out and infects everything around it? Instead of affecting a body, Maestru and Liber's infects the places that it visits. Sarah frowned. That's a big leap, Josh. I know. Believe me, I know. I just have this feeling. I don't think that I've ever seen you trust your gut over your head before. He looked up at her. That should tell you how strong the feeling is. She stared at him for a long moment. There was something about the way that he was looking at her that made her blood run cold. It was almost as if he was begging her to believe him. She put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed it reassuringly. What he was saying was more than a little out there, but he seemed so certain about it that she was convinced. Besides, Lamplight Woods had far more than its fair share of weirdness. She had a mythical teleporting rabbit with a horn that slept on her bed. In your analogy, the virus wouldn't stop at just setting up shop around the healthy cells, she pointed out. No, he agreed, relaxing visibly as he realized that she believed him. A virus attacks healthy cells. It can damage or kill them. If I'm remembering biology from last year correctly, it can even change the cells into something different. She shuddered. Which way do you think that Maestru and Liber's is going in? Damage, kill, or change? I don't know, Josh said, looking back at the camera feed. All I know is that these tents out in the town combined with Bingo being freed makes it pretty clear that they've got something on the agenda for Lamplight Woods. You should tell your dad about the tents. Good call, she said, taking her phone out of her pocket and looking at it. I don't have any bars down here. How about you? He checked his own phone and frowned. Let me see yours really quick. She handed it over. What are you checking? Shit. I was hoping it was just my phone, but it's the same for yours. See that error up in the corner? It's not that we're not getting a strong signal. Service is completely down. Sarah sat down on the edge of the desk and crossed her arms. You know, I wish that I was naive enough to believe that's just a coincidence. Chapter 30. Jenni finished the last bit of the can of peaches as she sat on the back steps watching the water. As a child, she had always loved the ocean. She hadn't gotten to see it very often, but when her family would take a trip or go on vacation near a coastline, she would plead with her parents until they allowed her to visit the beach. There were ponds and lakes in Ohio, sure, but the ocean was a different beast entirely. She had been mesmerized by its strength and size. There was something different about this particular ocean, however. She had watched it off and on for weeks now, and even though she hadn't noticed anything strange about it compared to the Atlantic Ocean from her childhood, she knew that something wasn't quite right about it. She glanced up at the sky and saw that night was rapidly approaching. The ocean would have to wait for another day. She stood up and walked down the beach to an area that she had marked with a large rock. She pushed away the sand to create a hole and put the can down into it before refilling it. She knew that under most circumstances it wasn't good to bury trash the way that she had been, but in this case, there was nothing else to do with it. Leaving it in the house would create clutter and an unhealthy living space, and it wasn't like there was trash collection here at the end of the world. Brushing herself off, she went back inside and shut the door. She made sure to lock it as she did so. The things that came out at night didn't seem to be able to break in. She wasn't 100% sure of that, though, so she made it a point to keep everything locked when it wasn't day. At first she had thought that she wasn't really hearing anything, that Curioso's warning to stay indoors during the night had caused her imagination to play tricks on her. The noises had been faint, after all, and it had been easy to dismiss them as the wind blowing through the boards of the old house. It hadn't required much effort at all to convince herself that had been the case. The noises had come every night since she had been there, though. Some nights they were far in the distance, and others they sounded like they were inches away from the house. She hadn't been able to keep up the self-delusion for long. There was something out there in the darkness each night, probably more than one thing. Jenni began to go through the evening routine that she had fallen into. She made sure that all food and dishes were in the places that she had made for them in the kitchen. There was no way to know if the things that came each night could smell the food in the containers, but on the chance they could, she wanted to reduce the risk as much as possible. Once that was done, she went around the house and drew all the curtains and blinds while checking to make sure that the locks were engaged. Finally, she went into the bedroom and made sure that she had everything that she needed. The bedroom was the room with the smallest amount of windows, so it made sense to confine herself to it during the night hours. She kept the curtains closed at all times, and she had also managed to hang one of the blankets behind them to make it almost impossible to see in from the outside. A supply of canned food had been put underneath the bed just in case she was unable to leave for a significant time. She had fashioned a crude spear out of a branch, and it leaned up against the wall next to the door. Being careful not to strain anything, she slowly pushed the dresser in front of the door leading out into the kitchen. The door swung inward and didn't have a lock, but the dresser was heavy enough to make someone think twice about trying to break into the room. With that done, she went into the bathroom and filled the bathtub with water. Every time she went through the routine, it made her feel like she was preparing for a hurricane. She had placed the lantern and fuel canisters onto the nightstand just in case she needed them. She had yet to light the lantern during the night. The benefits of being able to see better were tiny compared to the need to stay safe and unnoticed. She is keeping it close in case of emergency, however. Her eyes lingered on the lantern for a moment. The few times that she had lit it, all of which had been during the day, it had behaved strangely. The glow of the flame behind the glass panels looked bright when she looked directly at the lantern, but it didn't illuminate as large of an area as it should. She had no explanation for the curious anomaly. She took off her shoes, changed into a pair of sweatpants, and laid down on the bed. The clothes that Curioso had left her hadn't included sleepwear, so she made do with what she had been given. They were a bit too large and very warm. It was still better than nothing. Jenni wasn't sure how long she'd been lying there when she began to hear the sounds. She got out of bed as quietly as she could and retrieved the spear, before getting back in and sitting on the mattress with her legs tucked underneath her. She knew that she wouldn't be able to sleep until the noises were gone, so there was no point in trying to. Her grip on the spear tightened as she heard a sound just outside the kitchen. They were closer tonight. As always, she tried to work out what it was that she was hearing, but also as always, she couldn't quite come to a conclusion. The one thing that she was certain of was that it was some form of communication. The sound was somehow watery, like it was coming from underwater. It was also strangely like the noise a windshield wiper made as it passed over the glass. There was a definite rhythm to it, and the pitch rose and fell like the cadence of language. It wasn't any language that she had ever heard, but she was sure that it was one. The noises moved around the side of the house until they were directly outside the bedroom window. She sat still and held her breath. The sounds continued on for a few minutes, and she could hear something shuffling in the sand. Finally, they moved on further down the beach, and she quietly released the breath that she had been holding. It was possible that they would be back. Usually once they had left, they would stay gone until the next night, but a handful of times they had returned shortly before daybreak, before leaving for good just before the first light of day appeared. She didn't know where they went when they weren't outside the house, and she didn't really care as long as they left her alone. She laid back in the bed and set the spear down next to her, keeping it close just in case she needed it.